Hi everyone, glad to have you watching. I was mucking around in my old comic books and came across a bunch of things that I thought I might want to talk about. But the first one is this book, Power Factor. Um, it's kind of a strange title. It started, as you can see, at Wonder Color Comics. I'm not sure. Uh, they had some relationship to Pied Piper Press, um, and it was a Dave Campiti. He was the editor, I guess, kind of the man in charge of the line. Um, but this comic book started there at Wonder Color Comics, and then it kind of disappeared. It started in '87, and it disappeared, and then it popped back up at Innovation, which was another Dave Campiti uh, publisher, and uh, they essentially reused the art from the Wonder Color comic, added a few pages in the first issue of the Innovation version, and basically reused, almost all of the Innovation book was just a um, reuse of what had already been published by Wonder Color Comics. The writer, uh, Kevin Jouer, as far as I know, didn't really write anything else, or was not in the industry for very long. Uh, Doug Hazelwood and Tom Lyle started off on the book, and both of those names probably familiar to longtime comic book readers. Yeah, I'm familiar with both. Uh, I think uh, I think Tom Lyle got his start. His debut was with AC Comics on a book called Star Masters, and Doug Hazelwood did uh, inked Femforce and for a while and inked Night Vale, another book from AC Comics. So as an AC Comics fan, those names were familiar to me. Uh, as I said, the book was interesting. the The premise of the book was that the bad guys were uh, were figuring out the superheroes' identities and planning ways to eliminate them one by one, and either by killing them or getting them to stop their crime fighting by threatening their loved ones or just making them scared that they would be killed. And they, in the beginning, in the first issue, they're successful. They basically get rid of all the costume crime fighters. And anytime somebody's even thinking about becoming a costume crime fighter, they're there to snuff them out. Um, the the bulk of future issues is really, um, and I have issues 2 and 3. Um, Years later, the when people start trying to have heroes make a comeback, and they try to recruit some of the heroes that were in hiding, and um, basically they formulate a plan uh, to take down this criminal organization that had um, killed all these superheroes. So it's a very interesting premise. Um, it the most interesting part of it to me was the initial plot. Um, the If they had taken more time to flesh out how smart the villains were and how they were able to accomplish what they were accomplishing um, in terms of getting rid of these superheroes. Um, that's kind of done and wrapped up in about half an issue. And that's really the more interesting plot line. You know, I would have liked to have seen the heroes going against these villains at the time, trying to stop them, trying to keep themselves safe. What would have been in the heroes' minds? What were their thoughts? What did they do to protect themselves? Why were they unable to be successful? And, really establish the villains and their motivations as well over, however many issues before you just have the villains have won. And, everybody is cowed or dead. Just seemed, too easy. And because it was too easy, the villains didn't really seem as fearsome. If you had seen the heroes were trying to do things to protect themselves, and nevertheless the villains were able to take them out, you would have had much more of a sense of drama and tension. The formation of a new superhero team that's going to take down the criminal organization, that is a tried and true, that's a common storyline. The initial storyline of what if the villains were going to win, that's different. That's unique. So that's, this is an example of some of the interior art. Ron Lim, who many of you all know from DC Comics and Marvel Comics too, I think, was the artist on at least the beginning of this run. This is an example. This was added in the Innovation issue 1, this kind of prequel to what happened in the Wonder Color. You see what appears to be the same heroine on the cover here. She was not in the Wonder Color version. So for whatever reason, this was added in. And then, you have a little bit of exposition of what this criminal conglomerate, and this is the head guy of the criminal conglomerate, that's his son who will one day take over for him. His son actually admires the superheroes, and so the father has to set him straight that the superheroes are no good. They're bad for business. But actually, this issue was illustrated by Tom Lyle and Doug Hazelwood. Ron Lim did come aboard for, I think, issue 2 and 3 at Innovation. So you've got this plot, and then here's, another example. A superhero, he's fighting crime and helping people. But really, this is, the villains have set him up, and they figured out a way to, take out this overconfident superhero. And so another superhero down, and then you have another superhero who basically is coerced, threatened that if he doesn't hang up his costume, he'll suffer the same kind of fate. His family might be murdered. And so he goes along with it and kind of slides off into the shadows. And that sets the course at this point for what the series would be, which is they jump 20 years later. The head guy has passed away. His son is going to take over. And the bad guys are in control. And then you have these new good guys who are trying to form a superhero team to take them on. So a different kind of book, not typical, but this kind of innovation and innovation for Innovation Comics, creativity was what you had at the beginning of the direct market. I mean, 87. I think Innovation's version was 91, 92. Those were the beginning. That was still near the beginning of the direct market. I mean, you were within a decade of the beginning of the direct market at that point, and you had small publishers, small independent companies coming up. A lot of people who went on to work for DC and Marvel got their starts at these smaller companies, and really created things that were fresh and not quite as routine as what DC and Marvel were putting out at the time. So this was a different kind of story, with artists who later would go on to be mainstream DC and Marvel big name artists. And if you find it in a dollar bin, or whatever the bins are now, or find it in a collection, check it out. It's fairly well done for a small press book. Like I said, I would have explored some things that they kind of wrapped up very quickly, but the overall arc is something that I would have liked to have seen more of at the time. And this is probably not a book that will ever be rebooted. But those are my thoughts. Those are my comments on Power Factor. So I hope everybody has a good time if you happen to have it. Tell me your thoughts on it in the comments. If you enjoyed hearing about it and seeing some of the images of it, put a like on the video. If you've been enjoying some of the different content I've put up, go ahead and subscribe. If not, come back next time. Maybe I'll find something else that you'll like. I'll be back another time. Good night.